I remember the great job I did at Eastside.
It was brilliant. Good evening, everyone. My name is Todd, and I'm a grateful alcoholic.
Hi, Todd.
My sobriety birth date is February 12th, 2017. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I have sponsees that have sponsees. I love this program. I love everything about the program. This program has given me my life back and so much more. You know, I love our literature. My first sponsor asked me to get into it really early and had me just start from the very beginning, actually from the cover page, and start reading the forwards. And there is so much hope in just the very first sentence in the first foreword of the big book. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. All I know is I was at that point overnight, a little over 9 years ago. And I hope if there's anyone here or anyone listening that is in the grip of this disease and feels that they're in the grip of a hopeless state of mind and body, all I can say is I've been there and that there's hope in these rooms. And that's why I love that. It said there's 100 men and women who've recovered. The fact is now there's millions around the world that have recovered. There's a lot of people in this room. Krupel just came up and he's one that has shared his experience, strength, and hope, how he has recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind body. And I'm another one. And I'm so grateful to be here tonight. We share what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. What it was like. A little bit like Krupel. I don't have an excuse for my alcoholism other than I'm an alcoholic. I'm different. My body's different than non-alcoholics. I grew up in an incredibly wonderful, loving family in Eastern Washington. Grew up on a farm outside of Spokane. Parents married over 55 years until my father passed away 7 years ago this week. Our dearest neighbor was my grandparents on my father's side. They were a mile away. They were married going on 60 years before they passed. I had a pretty extraordinary childhood. Alcohol was never a part of our family culture. In fact, I'm not sure I saw a single family member, my parents or my grandparents on either side of my family, ever drunk. It just family functions, alcohol was never part of it. And so, so I don't have that story, that history. My first experience with alcohol, my first memory was when I was 6 years old. I went down to my grandparents. They lived down the road from us. And my grandpa and I went downstairs to play pool. And my grandmother had difficulty. She had limited mobility, so she couldn't go downstairs. Grandpa and I'd go down, we'd play pool, and Grandpa had a refrigerator down there. And Grandpa kept beer down in his refrigerator. And every time we would go down, my grandfather would go to the refrigerator, pull out a beer, and we'd play pool, and he'd drink one beer. In retrospect, I can't conceive of just drinking one beer, right? And so we would play pool, and Grandpa would have his beer, and we'd go upstairs. And I remember I was probably 6 years old. Sunny day, my grandmother's at the kitchen sink, sun shining in. She's sitting there washing dishes. And she goes, "What you boys been up to?" And Grandpa goes, "Oh, Todd and I have been downstairs playing pool and drinking beer." And my grandmother, in all seriousness, she turned around. "If I thought for one moment you guys were down there drinking beer, I would tan both of your hides." That was my first experience with alcohol. I didn't drink it, but it took me a long time to realize the significance of that event. Because when my grandmother said that, she turned back and my grandfather looked at me and he sort of smiled and sort of winked at me. But you know what? There's two significant lessons that took place. 6 years old, my relationship with alcohol began. Number one, I learned that alcohol and lying were inextricably linked. My alcoholism could not exist without its bedfellow of lying, deceit, dishonesty. You know, and I know my grandfather didn't understand what the foundation that he was laying in this future alcoholic. But he taught me one about lying, but actually which also laid in motion one of my greatest character defects is my grandfather demonstrated for me that it was more important to manage your image than to maintain your integrity. Understand? I sat there, my grandfather and I lied to my grandmother about what took place. And alcohol was at the center of that. That became the beginning of what I sometimes refer to as the holographic Todd, the chameleon Todd, the facade Todd. It was then that I learned that it was more important to manage the image I conveyed than actually who I was. It was more important than honesty. That has been a recurring theme ever since, and it's something I battle to this day. And that started, I didn't pick up a drink, but alcohol was at the center of that. My next experience with mind-altering drugs and alcohol actually happened when I was a freshman in high school. Had a very serious sports injury. Football, you know, on the field, ambulance, to the emergency room. A lot of fear. I didn't know if I was going to lose my arm. I thought maybe my sports career was over. It was the only sporting event that my parents weren't there. I'm laying in the emergency room. The doctors are scrambling, trying to find somebody that would sign the consent form so they could take care of me. I sat there for over an hour in excruciating pain and deep fear about what was going to happen. And eventually they got a consent form, and the doctors came in, and they already had an IV set up, and they put morphine in. I learned instantly that drugs and alcohol could take away my pain. And it wasn't just physical pain. The pain was so excruciating. I was going in and out of consciousness. When I was conscious, I was throwing up. The pain was so bad. But it was actually the mental and emotional pain, because I didn't know if my sports career was gone. I didn't know, because something seriously happened to my arm, and it was in such condition. I was future tripping to think they were going to have to amputate it. All I know is they put that morphine in. Within seconds, all my pain went away. All my fears went away. And, you know, that was my relationship with drugs and alcohol after that. Now, my main USC and problem was alcohol. Hard goods never really been a big part of my story. So first time I ever drank was a year later. I qualified for the Junior Olympics. I was running at a meet in Nashville, Tennessee. And one night in between events, some teammates, we went out, went to a discotheque, as in the 70s. And these young ladies, their school teachers came over and started buying us drinks. I'd never bought a drink. So I asked the lady, well, what should I order? My first drink was a Singapore Sling. I'll tell you, that drink came in this fluted glass and had an orange and a maraschino cherry and a little umbrella. It was glorious. I think I had a couple. You know, that's when I found alcohol and romance, excitement all came together. And that continued. Frankly, you know, I was very much in, you know, sports, academics. You know, drinking stuff just wasn't a part of my life then. Go to college and joined a fraternity. Drinking became a really big part of my life then. You know, just it's what you did, college life. And my next progression in my relationship with alcohol happened my freshman year. Midway through the year, And I think God was sort of putting something in my heart. And I realized that I drank every night for almost 2 weeks and drink fairly heavily. Um, my body metabolized alcohol really efficiently, so I almost never had a hangover, no matter how much I drank. And I actually thought for many years the fact that I tolerated alcohol meant I wasn't an alcoholic. Very naive. But anyway, I had this long period of drinking alcohol, and I just thought, Todd, this is something you don't want to continue. And so I just self-imposed on myself. I just stopped drinking for probably about 3 weeks, maybe a month. That became the beginning of a 30-year period of controlled, managed drinking. I thought, well, if I can control it this way, I don't have a problem and I can just manage it. And for the most part, it was controlled, social, managed drinking. And for all intents and purposes, you know, I'll sit here and say there weren't significant consequences of my drinking. Although I did get a DUI, I did go to jail, I had wrecked cars, I got into fights, I had broken relationships but I really didn't think it was that significant. Um, and the reality is, I excelled. My career went well. Most of my drinking was social, business functions, gatherings, fun times. So I didn't see a problem. What happened? In 2011, we had a very traumatic family event. Won't go into details, but it's in October of 2011, we had something happen that set in motion 3 years of living hell in our family. Every single day I was going home to chaos, hell. And the problem is, that's just life. That was life. Life got really, really hard. And I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the coping devices. And you know what? Going back to when I was a little frightened kid in the emergency room, alcohol, drugs took away the pain, gave me the courage. So every night from that point in October, I would go to work, and there was other things going on. My businesses, there's chaos there. My relationship with my wife was getting rocky. Just every area of my life was the foundation was eroding. And I'd go to work. I became a little bit of a workaholic. I buried myself into work. But every night I would leave the office about 5:30, and I'd go past one of 7 different convenience stores because I could only I wouldn't dare go to the same one twice in a row because remember at 6 years old, I became holographic Todd, right? I cared what that clerk thought of me. I wanted to portray the image of, I got it all together. Every night I'd go and I started out getting like one of those little 12-ounce soft-sided wine juice boxes. And I would go down, usually go behind in a parking lot in Factoria, Bellevue. And I'd sit there, usually, it was getting wintertime, dark fairly early, and I'd sit in the dark and I'd sit there and I'd drink that little bottle of wine. It'd give me a little bit of, I drink for the effect, right? I started in October of 2011. I stopped drinking socially. I drank medicinally. It became my solution to my life problems that I was dealing with. I would sit there, I would drink that, and I'd get ready for another flipping night of hell. I'd go home, and more times than not, it was hell. And that continued for a number of years. The problem is with this solution, as we all know, it progresses. Little 12-ounce becomes a bottle. Eventually, one bottle becomes 2 bottles. 2 bottles becomes 3. 3 bottles becomes 4. Oftentimes we hear that, we don't have a defense against the first drink. So I found a solution to that. If the problem's the first drink, then the solution is never have the last drink. And that actually became the way I drank. I would start on in the last year or so, I would start my first bottle of wine at 1:30 in the morning. I'd wake up almost on the dot, have my first bottle, sleep a few hours, go to work. I'd start into my second bottle at the office, work some, have a third bottle. Then I would go home and open up the fourth one. And my wife's thinking, I'm having my first drink for the day. There was basically last year, I was never drunk, but I was almost never sober. So that continued, but things started spinning out of control. Life started becoming unmanageable. I started developing health problems. I went on a long bender of I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, just drinking. And I came home one night and my wife looked at me and goes, "What's wrong with you?" And my father-in-law, who was a retired doctor, he took my pulse. He goes, "You got to get into ER, emergency room, immediately." And I go in there, and here I had developed a severe life-threatening arrhythmia. In fact, my heart rate got to the point it was beating, I think at one point it's like 220 some beats. Which basically is beating so fast, it's the equivalency of flatlining because it's actually working against itself, so there's no blood. And so my wife and daughter are in the ER room, and they look at me, and the doctors are just rushing. He's dying. He's dying. And so they get the paddles, and I'm alert, and I'm seeing this. And they didn't have a chance to give me any pain medicine. They just start putting the paddles on me, trying to get me back. And I just remember looking over my daughter and my wife, seeing the fear in their eyes. And so that's where the disease took me. In 2014, I knew I had a problem. I needed to get help. And so my first experience with AA, I made my way to an AA meeting over in Bellevue, Serenity Break, if you even know it. And I made my way into a first step meeting. And I sat there and I heard people talk about their experience, their bottoms. And again, alcoholic thinking, all I heard were the differences. And I heard all these people talking about their exploits and, just ruined lives, jobs, jails, and all this. And I would leave and go, well, that's not my experience. Maybe I'm not an alcoholic. And what I didn't hear, because I probably didn't have the capacity to hear, but one of the things that I emphasize now is the fact is my bottom was a bottom on the inside. I mean, I reached the bottom way before I got bottom. And my bottom is one, I had a soul sickness that was so deep, so excruciating. I was such a malcontent. There is no aspect of my life that I could hardly stand. I couldn't stand me. And the reality is, I really couldn't stand anyone around me. I was irritable, restless, discontent all the time. I was toxic. I was mean. And that was my bottom. In all seriousness, I remember times I'd be driving, I had the cars, had the house, had all the, actually, again, holographic Todd, right? If you looked at the holograph, it looked okay. But there was no substance to it. I'm not joking. I would drive from our house in Newport Shores to our offices, and I would see guys underneath a bridge. And I seriously envied them because I knew that it was only a matter of time before I was going to be there. And so I put myself in, I knew that I needed to get help. So I dabbled in AA. It didn't work. Continued to progress, got worse. In 2016, I put myself in a rehab. It was one of the most glorious 30 days of my life. And, it just, I was free. I was able to escape in this bubble. I learned about this disease. I gained knowledge. I accepted the fact in there that I was an alcoholic. I learned, but our literature tells you knowledge avails us very little about this. My problem, I left rehab, incredible experience. I had knowledge. I accepted I'm an alcoholic. One nearly fatal mistake is by my actions and what I did after I left rehab, I had, in retrospect, I think I thought I was cured. I actually, but I walked out and said, there is no possibility I will ever drink again. The fact that I would think that almost guarantees that I was going to have a relapse. Because, by me actually thinking that, I'm taking this disease for granted. I don't respect just how powerful it is. And sure as heck, 6 weeks later, and I cannot tell you to this day what the circumstances were, but somehow I ended up picking up a drink. And within a matter of weeks, I went from just one drink to it went to a whole nother level. And for 2 months, I was out. Then on February 12th, 2017, basically I got first stepped in the room by my wife. She basically said, Todd, if you can't get this figured out, you're probably gonna need to leave the home. So I don't share this often. I've only done it, I think, once or twice in 9 years. Really weird experience. And I had this moment of clarity, and I knew that something had happened. And I believe that God, my higher power, touched me that morning. There was this overwhelming sense of power. And yes, I'm going to do something different about this. And I have to. I want to for me. I want to for my family. So I told Nancy, I was at peace. And I go, I get it. She goes, well, what are you going to do? And I go, well, I know where I need to go. I need to go to AA. And so that was in the morning. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. I actually left the house. I went to my office. I grabbed the last bottle of wine I had in my office. I went into an interior office, sat down on the couch. There's no windows, closed the door, no lights on. I couldn't see the hand of my face. I actually opened up that bottle and I sat there in the pitch dark and I drank that last bottle. And I wept. I cried. I mean, it was, in retrospect, was that a goodbye to my solution? I wasn't really thinking that, but there was some weird psychological that I had that incident where I was alone in that dark, horrible place drinking that last bottle of wine. And that was the last drink that I've had in over 9 years. I went from there, made my way to the Alana Club. I was beat down and sat in the back of the room. And that became the beginning of this extraordinary journey. I have relapse in my background and story. And so what is it like now? And two questions, I'll finish up about 5 minutes, 6 minutes here. Two questions, and I asked, especially guys that I work with that have relapse in their background, I usually ask them, well, what's going to be different this time? I asked that of myself. And so why and how did I get sober that last time, February 12th, in the times I couldn't before? Number of things, but one, I entered that room that day with a completely different mindset. I had been broken down by the disease. I had sufficient humility, and that became the beginning. I was broken enough that I put down, I stopped fighting. I go, you know what? I'm not going to argue, am I really alcoholic or not? What's that really mean? Does it meet the disease? I mean, I used to get in that intellectual argument. I put that down. I accepted, step one, that I'm an alcoholic and I can never pick up first drink. And if I do, it will continue to progress and I will die. Number two, step two, I realized I tried everything. I tried my own strength and it failed. And I knew that I had to find a power greater than myself. Step three, really not that hard for me. I'd had a lot of God in my life. That actually was the biggest concern I had. Well, if this is a spiritual program of action, I need God in my life. Well, I've had God in my life. I've prayed. It was authentic. It was real. What was the problem? Well, what I've learned in this program is I didn't need more God. I needed a whole lot less Todd, right? Selfish self-centeredness, that was the root of my problems. I had been trying to manage that persona, that holograph. That's just me playing God. That's the power of this program. Through these steps is I get out, I stopped playing God and I let God be God. And I do my part. And so through those steps, I started working them one step at a time. So February 12th, I came in and I became willing. And I did everything that was suggested. I got a sponsor. My sponsor asked me to, go to 90 meetings, 90 days. I probably went to 200 meetings first 90 days. He asked me to start doing the steps, started doing the step works. He asked me to read pages 86, 87, 88 every single day. He asked me to call him every single day. He asked me to get into service almost immediately. I'd show up every day at the lawn club and I'd be a door greeter. He started asking me to go to a men's retreat. I did within the first 3 weeks. I started saying yes. I made recovery my number one priority in life. And you know what? As I continued through the steps in that first year, an amazing miracle happened. One is the obsession to drink was lifted. That is extraordinary. I was in hand-to-hand combat for years and I lost every time. But to eventually wake up and realize that it's no longer there, it doesn't have power, that is an extraordinary moment. So how do I keep sober today, one day at a time? I keep doing those things that I did back then. I actually believe that, again, it's a spiritual program of action. I had to develop sober habits. I had to do them long enough that they became ingrained in me every single day so that, when life got tough again, my program was there. I had a grant sponsor one time told me that, Todd, I can guarantee you the time's going to come that the only things that stand between you and a drink is your higher power. So you better work on your spiritual fitness. Today, I think there's one fear I hope I never lose, and that is the fear of that first drink. And I believe that the only way that I'm going to have a defense against that first drink is by maintaining and growing my spiritual fitness. So that's why every single day, the first thing I do is I roll out of bed on my knees. I say the third step prayer. I get up. I do some prayer and meditation. I connect with men in the program. I send out a gratitude list and a daily plan of action to 45 to 55 men a day. I've held a service position every single day since I've been in this program. I try to seek God's will in all of my affairs. I try to call out and make a call to 3 to 5 men in the program. I try to make myself available to be of maximum service to God and to others. I love this program. I love the life that's been given back, to me. And last minute, things aren't perfect. I still get resentments. I still get angry. I'm still an asshole at times. But the difference today and what it was before is I don't live there anymore. The other thing is I don't drink at those things anymore. And that's a gift from Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for letting me share.